In this lesson, we're going to review how to create filter pages based on a pivot table. If you take a look at the tabs on the screen here in this workbook, we have several tabs that have been created in blue. Let's take a look at those. So we've got a pivot table summary tab, which shows data that has been summarized. And then we've got a department filter as part of the pivot table, which shows different department codes: ACT, HRD, MKT, PCT, PRD, SLS, and WRH. What we've done is, instead of pivoting for each of those departments, we've created supporting tabs that filter for each of those departments. So for instance, ACT is filtered on the ACT tab, showing all of the relevant data for that department. For HRD, we have that tab showing its pivot table filtered by the HRD department. Now, the way in which we did this was not manual. We actually did this in an automated fashion. So that's what this lesson is about. It's about creating the filter pages in a pivot table automatically. So there's this function within Excel that allows you to create separate tabs which summarize the pivot table data and split it up by specific categories or by customers per tab, which can be extremely useful, especially in the case where you've got a workbook where you're working with a ton of data and the pivot has multiple options. And in that case, instead of creating potentially hundreds of tabs manually, this function will allow you to create the tabs automatically. So let's take a look at the steps. And this can be very useful for reporting, by the way. So the first step that you want to take is you want to select the table and then go to Insert Pivot Table. So presumably if you've got a raw data table, you can go to Insert Pivot Table. And then in the Pivot Table Options, what you need to do is you need to select Classic Pivot Table Layout. And that's shown on screen here on where you'd select that. And by the way, in the example that we're looking at here, the financial analyst has a headcount sheet of employees who have been working in a variety of different departments with specific roles. And the analyst would like to create a summary of the employee's salary split up by each role and department, with the department having its own tab. So if we want each department to have its own tab and show the salary data, then this is a useful technique. So we need to create a pivot table. We need to select Classic Pivot Table Layout. And then what we need to do is we need to put designation into rows, department into filters, because that's what we want to filter for and create tabs for. And then all of the other ancillary data for the headers that we have in our raw data is what we're going to put into the values section. The next step on what we would need to do is go to the Analyze, the Pivot Table Analyze part of the top ribbon, and then click on Show Report Filter Pages. And that's what's going to generate all of the filter pages. And Excel will create it for us. So let's put that into practice. Let's see how we do that using the raw data that we have, which starts in row 89 on this worksheet. So as you can see, we've got the raw data of employee data, containing employee ID, employee name, department, designation, gender, date of joining, their basic healthcare, housing rent allowance, medical allowance, transportation allowance, a special allowance, and their gross pay. So what we're going to do is we're going to pivot this. Now I'm going to delete all of the supporting data from the pages that I have in the Pivot Table Summary tab, ACT tab, HRD tab, and so on. This is the end result of what we're looking to accomplish. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete them and start from scratch. So let's go ahead and delete those. And let's first create a pivot table summary of the raw data. So I'm going to highlight everything, and then I'm going to go to Insert, the top ribbon, Pivot Table. I'm going to insert it in a new worksheet. I'm going to click OK. And I'm going to move it over to the right side. I'm going to rename the tab as Pivot Table Summary. And what I'm going to do is put department under filter, because that's what I want the different tabs to represent, and that's what I want to filter by. And then if I go back to the pivot table filter pages tab, I had indicated that I want to put designation under rows because I want that to be the row label. And then for values, I'm going to put present basic, house rent, medical, transport, special allowance, and gross pay. So I've got all that data summarized in my pivot table, and I've got a filter at the top for the different departments. Now let's go back and take a look at the next step. So now what I need to do is I need to go to the PivotTable Options and select Classic Pivot Table Layout from the Display option. So I go to PivotTable Analyze, click on Options, click on Display, and then I'm going to click on Classic Pivot Table Layout. I'm going to click OK. And as you can see, the look and feel of the pivot table goes to classic mode. And then if I go back to my instructions, there's one more step. I'm going to go to Analyze Pivot Table and click on Show Report Filter Pages. So I'm going to click on Pivot Table Analyze, click on the drop down for Options, and then I'm going to click on Show Report Filter Pages. And this option appears to filter by department because I created the filter for department. If you look at the navigation pane on the right here for pivot table fields, I put the department filter under filters, or the department code under filters. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And as you can see, Excel just created multiple tabs for me. In fact, it created 7 tabs, ACT through WRH. I'm going to highlight those ones in blue, and I'm going to move them to the end. But what they represent is the exact same data that's in my pivot table summary, except filtered for the department code. So the first one's filtered for ACT, the next one for HRD, then MKT, PCT, PRD, SLS, and WRH. So as you can imagine, this is a very powerful tool within Microsoft Excel if you need to create individual tabs containing reports based on a specific filter. And now that you know how to do it, I recommend building it into your financial reporting going forward.